using our talents to make money for a charity, but something happens to us when we get older, doesn't it? We start to feel kind of the pinch of real life. And what happens to most of us is that from about the age of 16 on, we start to make money for ourselves, and then we divvy out a little money for whatever charity it is that we want to support. And I think the difference there is interesting and it's worth exploring. A child's heart that sees an opportunity and wants to go out and raise money for a charity versus our adult hearts, which we work at our regular jobs, make money for ourselves, and then give money to charities. I think that difference is interesting. Children don't think twice, usually, about organizing money-making opportunities. I mean, that's not the way their brains are wired or work. They have fun, though, when they do a fundraising activity. They enjoy it. More often than not, though, we as adults see it as a big chore. So how many of you parents are like me, and you see the cookie dough flyers come home with your kids from school, and you just immediately groan? It's cookie dough time. We're going to sell cookie dough. Maybe you're on the reverse end of that, and you see kids running up to you with cookie dough flyers, and it's cookie dough time again. I think that a lot of these schools would do better just letting kids set up lemonade stands on their streets and probably make more money that way. And the reason why is it's hard to resist a kid at a lemonade stand, isn't it? You see a kid at a lemonade stand, not only are you going to give them 50 cents for the lemonade, but you'll probably throw in an extra $2 or $3 because they're so cute. And the reason why, I think, is that when we see kids at a lemonade stand, we're reminded deep down of something that we lost or something that we forgot as adults, about how fun it can be to actually set up and make money for a charity. When it comes to church budgets, and it comes to pastor salaries, and it comes to all those things that we hate to talk about, nobody likes to talk about those kind of things. I used to think in my mind that the biggest problem with churches collectively in America has to do with value. And I used to believe that our culture has kind of grown to value pastors and churches maybe less than they did some time ago. For example, we live in an age where parents wouldn't think twice about dropping $150 so kids can play soccer. They can get 10 practices in. They can get something's floating in front of my face. They can get 10 practices in for that $150. They can get 10 games in for that $150, and they get to kick the ball around and be social and play and compete in soccer. But the idea that the same $150 put in a youth ministry, for example, where they also get to kick balls around and play, but they get this, spiritually fed, that's kind of a foreign idea. We'll spend it here because this is what we value, but over here, not sure that we will. Or spending, for example, $100 on a counselor. Teen goes through a rebellious phase, and it's nothing for us to drop $100 on a counselor, $100 an hour, on a counselor for our teenagers. But the idea, that a youth pastor would ever get anywhere near $100 for an hour of his work is like, ooh, that's just like bad news. You don't say that. It's because the way we value pastors and so forth has changed over the years. But I'm not sure that that's the root of the problem when it comes to church budgets and understanding fundraising and tithing and giving. I don't think it's a question of value simply because I don't believe that God's economy is supposed to work on this goods and services kind of mentality. We're not supposed to approach our spiritual needs as human beings, as consumers, all right? You're not here today as consumers, and I'm not here as a person employed to give you a good or a service. That's not the way I think God wants us to think about His economy. Now, before I roll out a couple of statistics, I'm going to say that our church is supremely blessed and that most of these statistics don't necessarily apply to us. But I did want to share with you a little bit about what's going on kind of across from coast to coast in America today with churches. And the sad reality is that many churches are closing their doors, and they're having to close their doors, and others are on the brink of even shutting down across the country. And even kind of here in our own community, I have a pastor friend of mine who's in a very well-respected church here in town, and he said within 10 years that a of their financial supporters will be dead, and they'll be buried. And he said that's just a real scary prospect when you look at the future. He said within 20 years, 3/4 of all their givers will be dead and gone. He said the younger generation doesn't really give the way the older generation did. That whole greatest generation thing that we hear about often is actually true. They're also the generous generation. They're givers. Now, he's not the only pastor in town who shared those kind of concerns with me, and actually he's not the only leader of a charity or a nonprofit organization that shared those things. I've heard the same things from people who organize things all over town that are not religious institutions. They have the same sort of thing that's happening. This greatest generation, this generous generation of our grandparents, people before us, are passing away. And they're the givers. They're the ones that keep the engine of the nonprofit fueled and running. Statistics show us that Christians today have enjoyed a half a century of unmatched economic prosperity. Christians today have more than they have ever had before in this country. And yet, in spite of having so much more, we are still giving a smaller percentage of our income to church than Christians did during the Great Depression. That's pretty scary when you think about how bad the Great Depression was, and you can go back at that time. And Christians during the Great Depression, when they had nothing, were giving a higher percentage of their income to religious institutions than they are today. The percentage of Christians that give regularly to their local church has dropped. It's actually bottomed out to about 3%, according to 2010 statistics. 3%. Interestingly enough, the money that does come into churches today is spent differently than it was 50 years ago as well. And I think these two things are related. In 1968, 1 out of every $4 that came into a church was used on benevolence or on missions. To kind of fall back to the theme that we left in May, the Mayhem theme, the Great Commission is about keeping the song alive, keeping the song that Jesus sung alive. And so if you go back to 1968, 1 out of every $4 in churches were spent keeping that song alive. The ratios today have fallen to somewhere around 1 to 25. Where's the money going today? Studies show that churches are spending more on themselves, their facilities, their technologies. They're developing high-powered CEO-style pastors who are building congregational empires with consumer-driven worship services that look more like Hollywood productions than church gatherings. That's a big part of where it's going. So what's really going on? And what should we as High Places people take away from all this? And I want to take us back to the lemonade stand. And I want to take us back to a child's heart. Balin and Brenna, my two kids, they didn't wake up one morning and feel some kind of compulsion to make money for themselves. They didn't feel a compulsion to make money for a charity. But what they saw was an opportunity. They saw cars pulling in and out of our neighbor's driveway, and they saw people pulling out their wallets and buying things that were laid out on the driveway. And they saw it as an opportunity to just take a step and support something that they cared about, that they believed in, and people responded. Let's be honest with ourselves. Do we have that kind of passion as adults? When at Christmas time we see the bells ringing outside of Walmart, is that are we just compelled, in good spirit, to drop money in that little box? Are we passionate about supporting the Girl Scouts, really? Or do we just like their cookies? Well, let's be honest, they're good cookies. But are we really passionate about supporting the Girl Scouts? Is that why we buy those cookies? Do we feel a personal connection when we write a check maybe for an organization that's doing poverty work or feeding the hungry overseas? Do we feel a personal connection to that kind of giving? Or isn't it true that sometimes our giving feels obligated or required or another thing that we're supposed to check off our list? So I'm going to get to the Bible now, if I could. Matthew chapter 25, verses 14 through 30, if you have your Bibles and want to read along. This may be tough. I think I'll be all right. Set it up here for this very reason. Let's see what happens. Again, it will be like a man going on a journey who called his servants and entrusted his property to them. To one he gave 5 talents of money, to another 2 talents, and to another 1 talent, each according to his ability. Then he went on his journey. The man who had received the 5 talents went at once and put his money to work and gained 5 more. So also the one with the 2 talents gained 2 more. But the man who had received the 1 talent went off. He dug a hole in the ground and hid his master's money. After a long time, the master of those servants returned and settled accounts with them. The man who had received the 5 talents brought the other 5. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 5 talents. See, I have gained 5 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. The man with the 2 talents also came. Master, he said, you entrusted me with 2 talents. See, I have gained 2 more. His master replied, well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things. I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness. Then the man who had received the 1 talent came. Master, he said, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid, and I went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you. His master replied, you wicked, lazy servant. You knew that I harvested where I have not sown, and gather where I have not scattered seed. Well, then you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned, I would have received it back with interest. Take the talent from him and give it to the one who has 10. For everyone who has will be given more, and he will have an abundance. But whoever does not have, even what he has will be taken from him. And throw that worthless servant outside into the darkness, where there will be weeping and gnashing of the teeth. Fun, huh? We're going to have some fun with this passage today.